Hello and welcome to this edition of Tigunia TipTok. Today we're going to be talking about closing the fiscal period, the fiscal year. A lot of companies out there, as they get near the end of a fiscal year or a calendar year, start thinking about closing up the year, rolling their income statement accounts to retained earnings and that kind of thing. So we're going to talk about that today and basically how you do that within Business Central. Other systems, it's a fairly long and complicated process, but within Business Central, it's really a two-step process, and that's what we're going to go through today. The first step is going to involve closing out the accounting periods. The second task is going to be rolling the income statement accounts to retained earnings. So we're going to take a look at that. From within Business Central, then, we'll go to the first step where we're going to close the accounting year or the fiscal year. So we're going to go up here and we're going to search for accounting periods. And we're going to open up our accounting periods page. This is a page where it basically shows all of the monthly starting dates and the fiscal period. Ours is very simple in that it's a calendar year process, so we're okay with that. You will note here that 2020 has already been closed. The check marks in the closed column indicate that it has been closed. We're going to demonstrate this by closing 2021 and rolling the income statement there. I will make a note, though, is that even though there's individual months listed here with closed check marks here, within Business Central you don't close individual months, you close the entire year. If you need to restrict posting to certain months, you do that using the allowed from and to posting date functionality on the general ledger setup or on the user setup page. As far as the accounting periods, we're basically closing them all at one time. So it's actually a very easy process to do that with this screen open. You come up here and click on Process and hit Close Year. The system knows already that 2020 has been closed, and so we're going to go ahead and close the fiscal year from January 1st, 2021 to December 31st, 2021. So we're going to go ahead and click Yes on that, and you see very easy. 2021, all the periods are now closed. You've basically completed that process. We're not going to deal with inventory periods at this point. That'll be in another video where we'll talk about the use and functionality of inventory periods. But right now, the inventory period is closed. Be aware that when you do that, and let me just show you the error message that we got by starting to close 2022. There is a sentence in here that says once the fiscal year is closed, it cannot be reopened again, and that is true. You can't reopen the year. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't post back into that prior period, because for a lot of companies, you'll want to close the fiscal year, you'll roll your income statement to retained earnings. A couple of months later, your auditors or others may come and want to make some tweaks or adjustments to the prior year balances. You can still do that by setting your allowed from date back into the prior period and posting a transaction back into the prior period just like you would any other normal transaction. There's really no difference there. When you do that, though, you will need to come in and re-roll the income statement to the retained earnings if any of those adjusting entries related to income statement accounts. So just be aware of that, that you can go ahead and re-post back into that prior period even though the periods are closed. I'm going to select no here because I don't want to close 2022. This is also a good chance once you've basically closed the year, if you do need to set up another calendar year or another fiscal year, you can do that also. Click on Process and Create a Year, and the system will come out and give you the settings. You want to create 12 periods. They're all 1 month each starting on January 1st. I'm not going to do that now because I have enough periods open. But it also is a good chance once you're closing the period to go in and see, do you need to set up new periods? And you can see I've got a couple years already. So with the accounting period closed, now you basically need to roll your income statement. So we're going to change over to that process. Okay, so that process that we want to run is called Close Income Statement. So we want to come up here to our search bar, select Close Income Statement, and this box will appear. And now we'll talk about how to fill out the various fields on here. One, the system should already know what fiscal year end you want to close based on your accounting period. If you do have to go back and make prior adjustments, then you do need to come back and re-roll this accounting or this close income statement process like we talked about before. And so you want to make sure that your fiscal year end date is set properly. What the system is going to actually do is create a closing journal entry which you'll have to post. And so because of that, you need to be able to give the system a template, a general journal template and batch to generate that journal too. So we've selected that here. We also need to select a document number. You can let the system select the next number, or you can enter something more descriptive for your document number if you choose to do that. You also will specify the retained earnings account, and then also whether you want to post a retained earnings in just a total balance or by account. Usually it's by balance, otherwise you're going to have multiple entries into your retained earnings account, which is not necessarily necessary. So you can just select the balance account and it'll just put one line item in your retained earnings. And then you'll select a posting description for the journal entry. In this case, we're going to close accounting or close an income statement fiscal year 2021. At this point, you need to decide what you're going to do about dimensions. Assuming you are using dimensions, you'll need to determine whether to post with your dimensions or not with your dimensions. So I'm going to go through each one and kind of go through the pros and cons of it. Right now, if you want to select to post with your dimensions, then you would go ahead and select the assist button here at the far right of this field, and you would select which dimensions you want to use and generate transactions for. I'm just going to go ahead and select all of them, so it'll create journal entries for every dimension combination that got posted throughout the year, and you'll see that here in just a minute. So we're going to close that. We'll go ahead and run that process. It's going to go through and generate reversing transactions or closing transactions for all the income statement accounts that you specified. So it says it was created, all the lines were created, so we want to go over now to the general journal that we specified. And you can see now that it populated the general journal with closing entries. So a couple of things I want you to make note of. First off, there's multiple lines per account. The reason for that is because there are multiple dimension combinations that were used throughout the year that transactions were posted to. So it's actually summarizing all of the transactions for that specific dimension set. And so you'll see a different line for every dimension set. So if I come up to the first line and go to line dimensions, you'll see I've got 30 as the area and RL as the purchaser. If I go to the next line and go to line dimensions, you'll see I've got 30 medium sales PS. So every single combination or dimension set combination that was used throughout the year, it's going to create a reversing entry or a closing entry for that set of dimensions. You'll also notice that over here on the posting date shows the last day of the fiscal period, but it also puts a C in front of it. This C is to help identify that this entry was a closing entry and not one of your normal entries. There are some of your reports, account schedules specifically, where you can specify whether you want to include or exclude your closing entries. Usually you'll exclude them because you don't want those muddying up the transactions or the balances on your report. But at least it gives you a way to be able to identify which of your, in this case, 12/31/21 transactions were regular transactions versus which were closing entries. So you can see using this approach, especially with the lot of dimensions in play, it creates a lot of lines in your journal entry. And because there's going to be, like I said, a line for every account and every dimension combination. You'll see down here at the bottom it created the one line to the retained earnings to be able to close that out. This entry is now good to post. The only thing that would stop this is if you happen to block any of your dimensions throughout the process, so you might want to be aware of that if this doesn't post properly. But I can go ahead and post it as is. I'm not going to do that right now because I want to show you the other approach and how that works. So I'm going to go ahead and select all these lines and delete them. Okay, so I want to close out the journal and I want to come back to my close income statement process. I'm going to leave everything the same except down here with the dimensions. This time I'm going to remove all of the dimensions settings. And so you'll see when I run the process how it will only create one line per account. Now you'll also notice that when I close this window, the system is going to warn me that there are certain accounts set up in my chart of accounts where the value posting setting on the dimension is set so that it requires certain dimensions, and so it's just warning me that there's accounts out there that may not post properly. So with that blank, I'm going to go ahead and create my journal entry. You'll see I'll get that warning message again saying, now just be aware that there's certain accounts that won't post or that have dimension restrictions on them that you might want to be aware of. Do you want to continue? Yes, we do. It's created the lines. So now if we come over to the general journal, you can see now that there's only one line per account. And if I go to the line dimensions, there are no dimensions on this transaction. That's because I didn't specify any. It's only going to create one entry per account all the way down to the retained earnings. Now, if I tried to go ahead and post this, in fact, let's go ahead and try and do that. If I click post, I'm going to get a dimension error saying that there's certain accounts on here that require certain dimensions and I don't have them set up. So this is one of the pros and cons of using this approach as opposed to the one with the dimensions. If you create with dimensions, you're going to get a whole bunch of lines in your journal entry, and depending on how many dimension combinations you have and are using, your general journal could be hundreds, maybe even thousands of lines, depending on how many dimensions that you're using. And so be aware of that. That's one of the pitfalls of using dimensions, is that it creates a ton of lines if you have a lot of dimensions in use. If you're not using dimensions, it's only going to create a few lines, at least one per account, but now your journal entry won't post. So there's actually a very easy process to go through to get your journal entry to post, and that's basically using configuration packages to remove the restrictions on your chart of accounts and then reestablish them after you've posted this closing journal entry. Since this is a closing journal entry, having dimensions on it isn't really critical because you generally exclude closing entries from any reporting anyway, so you don't necessarily need to have those dimensions, but you might want to talk about it internally to see if you want those to have that. So in order to deal with the dimension restrictions, we're going to have to deal with the chart of accounts and removing all of those descriptions. You can do them individually, but I wouldn't recommend it, especially, like I said, if you have a lot of them. What I recommend using is basically a configuration pack. So I'm going to go over to configuration packs, and I have one set up called default dimension. So I'm going to go ahead and open that. You can see I'm using the default dimension table. The default dimension table is where all of those value posting restrictions are set, not only on the chart of accounts, but also the default dimensions that you would establish for customers, vendors, items. They're all stored in that table. So what we want to do is extract all the entries from the chart of accounts table and basically remove those. So if I take a look at that table, and I want to come in here and I want to go to table fields first, because I don't need all of the fields, so I just want to grab these first few fields. The table ID, the number, the dimension, the value posting is the critical one. So those first 5 fields I want. And then I also want to filter that table, and I only want to grab the table ID 15. Table 15 is the GL account table, so I only want to grab the defaults for that. And I also only want to grab those where the value posting is not equal to blank. So there's something there. It's going to be usually code mandatory or same code, but I only want to extract those records. I could extract all of them, but why? It just brings more records into your configuration file that you don't need. So with that being said, I go ahead and close that. Now I'll go to Excel and I want to export that to a table. You can see down here it created an Excel file. If I open up that Excel file, and it's opening up on my other screen, let me drag that over here. You can see that it created, or that it brought in from my default entry, all of those entries where I've got value postings. Now what you're going to want to do, I don't have very many, you may have a lot. What you want to do is save this file off to your desktop or some other file storage location, because you're going to need this exact file here in just a couple of minutes. So go ahead and save that file off, and then save another version of that where you come in here to these value postings and delete them all so that there's nothing. Then you want to save this as a separate file. because you're going to import this in just a minute to remove all the value postings from your chart of accounts, and then you're going to need to reestablish it. So I'm going to save this file. I've already saved it off to the side, so I don't need to do so right now. So now that I've done that, I've extracted that, I want to go ahead and import. And in this case, I want to import the file where I have removed the dimension file posting. So I've got this file in here called default dimension blank, because that's where the value postings have been blanked out. I'm going to bring that in, I'm going to import that file, and then I'm going to apply that data. And you can see it modified some records, which is great. Now if I go back to my journal entry, which before wouldn't post because of the dimensions, now it will post successfully because there are no more value posting restrictions on any of my charts. So those were posted properly. Now you want to remember, after posting that then, is to go back to your configuration pack, go back to the default dimension one that you created, come to the line, Excel import. Now you want to grab the file, that original file that you had, and I've called mine defdim orig, or for original. That's the file that has all of the value postings on it. I want to re-import that and then apply the data there. And you can see that it's modified the records again, basically reestablishing those value postings. Now be aware that this might want to be a process that you do after hours, because in that interim where you blanked out all the value postings from your default dimensions, transactions could get posted that are missing dimensions, and then you'd have to go back and fix them later. But you can see that it's usually a very quick process. I would create the journal entry first to make sure that's all ready to go, and then you can zero out the dimensions or clear out the dimensions, post your journal, reestablish the dimensions on the chart of accounts, and everything will be just fine. At this point then, your closing entries are posted, your retained earnings has been corrected or brought up to date, and your year end is basically closed at this point. Would remind you then to go into the general ledger settings setup field or the user setup and make sure that the allowed from posting dates restrict people from posting into that prior period, and they can only post to the current period. And then you would only set that back up if after an audit or after a review of your financial statements you needed to make some entries back into that prior period. Just set the posting allowed from posting date back into the prior period, make the adjustments, and then reset the allowed from date, and then rerun the close accounting statement, close the income statement accounts to retained earnings once again to fix all of that. So hopefully that's a good process for you to run. Like I said, it's really two things, just closing the periods and then posting or closing your income statement to your retained earnings. Since this is only once a year process, go back and link to this file so that you can come back to it every year and just remind yourself how this process works within Business Central to get your year-end close. Once again, if you have any questions, go ahead and give us a call here at Tigunia. We'd be happy to help you with anything that you might need, not only related to closing the year end, but any other aspects of Business Central, Power BI, your IT infrastructure, whatever you need. We're here at Tigunia to help. So hopefully this was helpful to you, and hopefully you get your process working just fine. And give us a call, like I said, if you have any questions. Have a good day.